So, welcome to this module on the Code of Ethics. I'm Brendan, and I'm the person behind the voice that you've heard a lot already in many of the modules on the online course. So, this is the first in a series of videos that's going to help you out a little bit in respect of values and motivation. Now, I've absolutely no idea what the questions are going to be. However, having considered and pondered all aspects of values, ethics, and what the police are looking for and what's current at this moment in time, I do believe that you'll get asked questions either on the Code of Ethics, the meaning of the Code of Ethics, and the importance of the Code of Ethics. Secondly, you could get questions on legitimacy. So what does legitimacy mean in a policing context and why is it so important? So that's going to be the second video. The third video is going to look at integrity, the meaning of integrity in a policing context and why that is so important. And the very last video, the fourth video, is going to look at community engagement, the relationship that the police have with their communities, the communities that they're a part of as opposed to apart from. Now, a little bit about my credentials to be able to speak about this. I was a police officer for 28 years, but importantly, I think, as a neighbourhood inspector for 7 or 8 years. I think it was just over 7 years. And that's when these sort of concepts, these values really struck home. Way before that, though, as a probationer, I had some really good role models in the police who, when I look back, my sergeants, inspectors, my fellow constables at the time, they had the Code of Ethics in their DNA. These values that I'm going to talk about in terms of the Code of Ethics, nothing new. They're the sort of values that really good, solid, outstanding police officers have had for centuries. So, but it was when I became a neighbourhood inspector that these sort of concepts really struck home. Since then, since I've retired, I've gone on to speak at conferences about community engagement, problem solving within communities, and indeed I'm also a member of the International Advisory Board for a European Union project called Unity, which is looking to improve the relationship between citizens and the police right across Europe. So hopefully that'll give you a little bit of trust that what I'm about to talk about isn't just based on some wacky ideas that Brendan's had. It's based on a grounding of experience, academic research, and practical research about what's out there at the moment. So this very first video is looking at the Code of Ethics. So the first thing you're going to need to do to be able to prepare for this is print off the Code of Ethics, and there it is, College of Policing Code of Ethics. I'm not going to put any links on this. All I'm going to say is Google College of Policing Code of Ethics, and that should bring up the latest version, because if I put a link on there, it may become broken by the time you watch this. So there's a lot in the Code of Ethics. Look, there's more than several pages. You've got 5 minutes to talk about the Code of Ethics, if indeed that's one of the questions that you're asked about. You could write a 25,000 word dissertation on the Code of Ethics. So that's not what they're looking for. They're looking for you to demonstrate that you've got a good understanding of what the Code of Ethics are, what they mean, and how they impact on communities, how they're going to impact on your role as a police officer. So whenever I, on my seminars, whenever I run this question by people, invariably what they do is they start off by repeating, you can just see them there in the box out, what the principles are, the 9 policing principles for the Code of Ethics, which are accountability, fairness, honesty, integrity, leadership, objectivity, openness, respect, and selflessness. Now on the Facebook group that you should be part of, if you're not, email me and I'll give you access to the secret Facebook group. Quite a few people have been looking to see how they can come up with fancy words to help them remember those principles, all sorts of variations. Acronyms, I think, is the word that I'm looking for. But even then, if you just describe those, and kind of explain them in a bullet point a little bit. You're about 45 seconds to a minute into your answer, and it's not enough. You're going to be there for another 4 minutes, sort of twiddling your thumbs, and that's going to be a really uncomfortable 4 minutes. So I'm not going to give you an answer. I think that would be unethical to do that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some ideas and some concepts and some things to think about so you can construct your own answer. The last thing you want to do, although you're probably thinking at the moment, no, I'd like to do this actually, is be a clone of Brendan and just repeat exactly what I talk about. I don't think that would be valuable for you, and I'm not sure about the ethics of that. So what I'm going to do is just give you some things to think about. You research it yourself. You need to understand the code of ethics before you join the police. So I'm going to just point you in the right direction, really, to stop you coming out with an answer which starts off with, the code of ethics is made up of 9 principles and it's really important because of... No. But I would expect you to know, not all 9 if you're under a bit of pressure, but I need to expect you to know that it's about being fair at all times. That you'd be expected to be honest, that you'd be expected to demonstrate integrity, leadership, respect, and openness. So I certainly expect you to be able to remember some of those key ones when you're talking about the code of ethics. Because what I don't want is you forgetting one of them and getting into a real tiz in minute 1 of that answer because you can't remember one of those principles. Move on. The assessor's not really looking for whether you can remember 9 words. My daughter can do that, and she's 8. She could remember 9 words and repeat them an hour later. What they're looking for is, can you demonstrate your understanding of those words? So these principles, the Code of Ethics talks about, they should be embedded in the way that you behave. All police professionals, so it's not just about police officers, it applies to PCSOs. It applies to crime scene investigators. It applies to anyone who is in the police service. Code of Ethics applies to everyone. And here's another thing as well. Code of Ethics is really quite interesting in that it's not just a good idea. These were introduced in July 2014, so they're a few years old now. Not just a good idea. This is the legislation of the land. The Code of Ethics is a code of practice, so it's not just a rough guide, it's not a would you could you please, it's a must, it's an absolute must. You need to demonstrate that you've got a good understanding of the Code of Ethics so that you can comply with the Code of Ethics. So it's all about the standards of behaviour, but those standards of behaviour are going to be demonstrated through your values. So your values will determine how you behave. And one of the real difficulties that police officers have, and it's right they should have this difficulty, is they're dealing with really complex situations on a daily basis. So the Code of Ethics will help them make really good, sound, ethical decisions. And to further support that, there's the National Decision Model, but we'll come to that after. Now, I mentioned earlier that the Code of Ethics is nothing new, really. The Code of Ethics actually refers to the person who initially came up with some standards and principles for the police service, which was Robert Peel back in 1829. The founder of the Metropolitan Police Service came up with a series of principles, guidelines for the way that police officers should behave. And I think you'd be right to refer to these and dig them out. Google it, just Google Peelian Principles, P-E-E-L-I-A-N, and it'll bring it up. And it's mentioned in the introduction there for the Code of Ethics as well. There'll probably be a reprint of this actually soon, because I've just noticed that the introduction is by Chief Constable Alex Marshall, who is moving on as the Chief Executive of the College of Policing. So there should be another version of this coming out. It'll be interesting to see if any of the wording gets changed. For the actual code, it shouldn't do, because it's a code of practice. It needs to go in front of Parliament to actually change the wording. Anyway, back to the Peelian Principles. Send a shiver down my spine, some of these principles. Back in 1829, Robert Peel was talking about respect. That the only way that the police are going to be able to perform their duties is if the public approve of their actions, their behaviours. And through their behaviours and their actions, they will secure and maintain public respect. It's pretty much what the Code of Ethics is talking about the willing cooperation of the public in how they investigate crime and secure the peace. And there's another part that I really like about how the role of a police officer is about the ready offering of individual service. The ready offering of individual service. And friendship to all members of society without regard to their race or social standing. So back in 1829, Robert Peel was talking about citizenship, and the Code of Ethics, I believe, is there to kind of enhance that sense of citizenship. That sense that, you've heard this phrase before probably, one of the Peelian principles, a historic tradition that the police are the public and the public are the police. The one thing that often doesn't get quoted, though, is that the part about the police just being citizens who are paid full-time to carry out a role which is incumbent upon all citizens in the interests of community welfare. So back then, in 1829, Robert Peel had set some guidelines and principles for the police, offering friendship to all, respect, public approval, willing cooperation, remembering that you're just a citizen, but you're a citizen who's paid full-time to carry out a role which is incumbent upon all citizens in the interests of community welfare. Visionary, absolutely visionary. Those principles apply more now, I'd suggest, than they have done at any time. So if you want, you could talk about that a little bit in your answer. But then we've got to start coming up with some meaning in respect of these principles. So when you look at the actual policing principles themselves, one of the comments there is about doing the right thing in the right way. Easy to say, but the public expect the police to do the right thing in the right way. But they expect them to be accountable for their actions. They expect to be treated fairly. They expect to be treated with respect. And they expect to be treated by police officers who are honest. Here's something though. You've got to ask yourself the question, why would you need legislation for those things? So that might be something else that you want to explore. Why do you need legislation to tell police officers to be honest, to respect others, to be fair? Surely these are things that police officers would be expected to do as an absolute given. Why do you need a code of ethics? Why do you need legislation to push police officers to do that? And it's not the first time that legislation has been utilised to try and get officers to behave in a certain way. For the special constables and the PCSOs among you, you should be acutely aware of something called the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. So there it is. I'd like you to Google this, the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, Code G. Code G is the code of practice for the power of arrest by police officers. It tells police officers, essentially, how to treat members of the public when they are arrested by the police. Now, the Police and Criminal Evidence Act is a code of practice that was came live on the 1st of January 1986. It's the Police and Criminal Evidence Act in 1984. So it's getting on a bit now. It is now over 3 decades old. And yet, in 2012, this is the amendment here, and you'll be able to get this from Google. It's a public document. You shouldn't have any problem finding it. But in 2012, I found it of interest that in the very first paragraph, right at the introduction up there, it says this, that this code of practice deals with the statutory power of the police to arrest a person who's involved or suspected of being involved in a criminal offence. The power of arrest must be used fairly, responsibly and with respect for people suspected of committing offences and without unlawful discrimination. Now that's the insert. In 2012 they felt it necessary, the legislators of our land felt it necessary to say that when you arrest someone, could you please do it fairly, could you please act responsibly, and could you please respect people who you believe, who you suspect have committed offences. Oh yeah, and don't do any unlawful discrimination. Sort of added that little bit. Why did they have to do that? Why did the legislators of our land feel that it was so important to tell police officers that they need to respect those people who they arrest, that need to be fair to them, need to act responsibly, and don't do discrimination in 2012, 28 years after that, the Act of Parliament that introduced the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. So 28 years later, they introduced that. Well, one of the things that you might want to explore then is the concept that a very small percentage, a really small percentage of officers have in the past failed to demonstrate those values, those principles which are so important to our police service, those principles and values that are inherent within the Peelian principles, that are specific within Code G of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, and which are specific in respect of the Code of Ethics. Prior to the Code of Ethics, prior to Code G, each force just had their own guidelines. What was then the Association of Chief Police Officer had their own guidelines as well, but that's what they were just guidelines. They couldn't be enforced. There was no legislation behind them. And so, I suppose bluntly, police officers could get away with misconduct by saying, well, no one told me how to respect people. Where does it say I've got to be honest? Where does it say I've got to demonstrate integrity and fairness? There's nothing about that in any legislation. Now, I'm being a little bit, not flippant there, but a bit sort of blunt, but I do know that there have been cases of misconduct where police officers have been found not to have a case to answer because there was no legislation. There was nothing set in stone to say, this is the standard. That's the standard that we need you to aspire to, that we need you to behave in this way. So the background to the Code of Ethics was because of cases where police officers had been involved in misconduct, but they hadn't been called to account correctly. They hadn't been called to account. And the public rightly believe that to be unfair. They expect police officers to hold the highest of values, the highest of principles, and rightly so. Rightly so. That's why we've got the police service that we have, one that we can be very, very proud of. And you still find cases like that today. There's one here I'm looking at here from 2016 about a man who was found hanged the day after he was unlawfully detained. He was put in an unauthorised headlock, illegally strip searched by police who stopped him on suspicion of criminal damage at a takeaway. He had mental health issues. It was believed that the police officers, according to witnesses, had roughed him up, they'd used too much force. The inquest jury, the coroner's hearing, found that there were errors, omissions and failures, that the police officers used unreasonable, disproportionate, unnecessary force. And in this case as well, there were police officers who chose, I do believe, reading in between the lines, not to outline a full account of what happened. And importantly, they did not bring their fellow officers to account for things that were clearly the misuse of force, were clearly actions that were over the top. So prior to the Code of Ethics, there might have been some wriggle room for these officers to, if they were held to account through a misconduct hearing, or a disciplinary hearing as they were called back then, would find a way to wriggle out of it. Not with the Code of Ethics. Code of Ethics would make it really clear that excessive use of force is a breach of the Code of Ethics. Failing to hold a fellow officer to account by reporting their misconduct is a breach of the Code of Ethics. And so this is where the Code of Ethics really starts to live. You could also give some examples of how some forces now give a very open, actually all forces are very open now about their misconduct hearings. Prior to the Code of Ethics, if you wanted to attend a misconduct hearing, well, to start with, you wouldn't even be able to find out when and where it is being held, and you certainly wouldn't be allowed to attend. Now you can attend misconduct hearings. The public can attend misconduct hearings to see how those people who it is believed have done something which is inappropriate, unacceptable, contrary to Code of Ethics, are going to be held to account by their peers on behalf of their fellow citizens in their community. So forces are now publishing them. Here's some examples from Greater Manchester Police. North Yorkshire Police even stream some of those hearings live, so you can see anywhere in the world one of those hearings being held. Now, there's a really interesting one in this one from Greater Manchester Police here. Let's see it now. There was a police officer who failed to apprehend a suspect for an assault that had been seen entering a public house. Now, that's not why they were later dismissed as a result of the hearing. They were dismissed because they lied to the communications room about their location and about the suspect's whereabouts. And there's some of the shenanigans as well. But the fact is they lied. And that's why they were dismissed. Because of the lack of honesty, the lack of integrity, which are stated really clearly in the Code of Ethics. There's a second police officer there who observed all of what took place with the first police officer. That second police officer was also dismissed. The reason they were dismissed is because they failed to challenge that officer about the false information that they gave. And they failed to report that matter to their supervision. So under accountability, under the Code of Ethics, which makes it an absolute requirement to report misconduct, that police officer was dismissed. And rightly so. How can you trust someone who cannot have the integrity, the honesty, those values that should be inherent within every police officer to report a fellow officer who is blatantly and clearly lying to their fellow officers? Prepared to lie in front of your fellow officers, what you're prepared to do in terms of lying about a case. And history is strewn with examples of where the police have lied, or whether they've been economical with the truth, or where they've failed to reveal evidence which would benefit the suspect in terms of the suspect's case. Code of Ethics takes care of all of that now. So it's not that police officers won't commit acts of misconduct. Sometimes police officers will do something, and Alex Marshall's already talked about this at various conferences, that police officers should be supported for making decisions that don't work out. But there's a difference between making a decision that doesn't work out and a decision which is based on knowingly committing an act of misconduct which is contrary to the Code of Ethics, knowingly telling lies, knowingly fail to account, knowingly failing to report the actions of misconduct of a fellow officer. That's when it becomes misconduct, not when you make a genuine mistake. Genuine mistakes, trying to do the right thing with the information and intelligence that you have available to you at that time, there's a big difference. And that's where you should also explore, let's dig it out for you, why there is now a Code of Ethics, which is, the National Decision Model, which is built into the Code of Ethics. So I'll just dig that out for you. It's in here somewhere. There it is. So the National Decision Model, you see right at the very heart of it is the Code of Ethics there. So this will help you make ethical decisions. It's part of the Code of Ethics. So the reason it's there is to help you make good ethical decisions. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole of the National Decision Model, but you should be kind of familiar with it. You should also see aspects of this in respect of the Kutsar model. Bit of homework for you there. Have a look at Kutsar, have a look at the National Decision Model, and see if you can see whether there's any links between the two there. There's a few links. So anyway, some forces have gone as far as to have ethics panels. So for the force that you're looking to join, I'd suggest you research that. Take a look, see if your force has a ethics panel. Now, what those ethics panels are there for is to enable officers who are going to make difficult decisions, who aren't quite sure what direction to take because of the ethical issues that exist within that complex problem, to use that ethics committee or that ethics board or panel as a sounding board. Now, if your force does not have such a thing, it's the sort of thing that they might want to consider. You could suggest it once you're in, or perhaps give it a bit of time before you make suggestions like that. But they should have something like that. If not, there's no reason why you can't bounce your ideas off someone who you know and trust. So if you were called to account, and it's right that you should be called to account for your decisions in the future, you would be able to indicate how, in making your decision, you discuss some of those issues with your fellow officers, with your supervision, and because you want to be accountable and open, you also made a record of why, your rationale behind those decisions. And the National Decision Model will help you with it. But you see, right at the heart of it is the Code of Ethics there. So what else? Well, I'm just looking at the timer there. That's 25 minutes I've been talking. You need to talk for 5 minutes. So that will have given you plenty to think about in terms of any question that you're going to get asked about the Code of Ethics. Whether it's looking at how officers are held to account today, the reasons behind the Code of Ethics, how it's not just a new idea, it's been around for a while in terms of Code G of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, how it's been around for a long time, all the way back to the Peelian principles, but remembering these are just principles, not a code of practice. So plenty for you to explore there. Go and research what's current within your own police force that you want to apply to. The other thing I'd suggest that would be really useful is just to go and knock on the door of your local police station. See if you can get on a ride along with your local officers. If you can't get a ride along, see if they'll just sit down with you for 10 minutes. And I'd ask the question, how does the Code of Ethics impact on your role, what you're doing currently as a neighbourhood officer, response officer, detective, whatever it might be? And just see what they come up with. It's because you've got something there as well. You've got some experience that you can utilise in your answer. So you can refer back to last week I visited such and such police station where I spoke to some of the sergeants and constables about the Code of Ethics and how they impact on their role on a daily basis. And then talk about, you should have some examples there that come from either those officers, or if you are lucky enough to secure a ride along, and a lot of forces do ride alongs, best way of doing it is not through headquarters. Best way of doing it is go and knock on the door of your local police station and just tell them that you're looking to join them, and build up a rapport. I only know one person who's ever been knocked back, and he just went to a nearby station a few miles away and knocked on the door, asked the same questions, and got welcomed in with open arms. I know one of my clients who got passed from pillar to post. He spent 15 minutes with one of the constables, 15 minutes with the PCSO, half an hour with one of the sergeants, and then was taken to the inspector's offices where he had a good chat with the inspector for an hour, and then he went on a day ride along with one of those officers he met. So every force has their own different take on that sort of thing, but go and knock on the door, ask questions about the Code of Ethics. See if there's any posters of the Code of Ethics on the wall. There are some police stations where I've been in where I've seen big poster boards with lots of examples of where the police officers have exhibited those Code of Ethics. It won't actually say this is when this police officer exhibited these aspects of the Code of Ethics, but when you look at the cases that they've been involved in and the excellent job that they've done, you'll see that the Code of Ethics kind of is there in their DNA. They didn't behave according to the Code of Ethics because of the Code of Ethics, it's just because of the sort of person they are. So I hope you're going to be that sort of police officer where the Code of Ethics isn't something that you need because you exhibit those values in everything that you do because it's in your DNA. You're not behaving to the Code of Ethics because it's an act of Parliament. You're behaving to those Code of Ethics because it's what's expected of you by your fellow citizens. Because remember, that's what you are. You're just a citizen who's paid full-time to carry out a role which is incumbent upon all citizens in the interest of community welfare. So I'll leave you with that one. In the next video, we'll be taking a look at the meaning of legitimacy in the policing context. And following that, we'll be taking a look at integrity in the policing context, and followed by community engagement. All of these link in with each other. Don't think that they're separate. They all link in with each other. They're all intertwined. But if you research all of those subjects, I'm quite sure you'll be well placed to answer any questions at the Assessment Centre about values, ethics and motivation. Okay, so I'll catch up with you in the next video. You know what I'm about to say now, don't you? The only way forwards now is to practice, practice, practice. But before you do the practicing around these sort of questions, you need to do a little bit of research. I'll catch up with you on the next video.